Monogamy is ridiculous. Agricultural
Oh?
practices introduced the concept of private property, which led to societal enforcement of relationships composed of one man with one or more wives.
The whole concept of private property, which is inherently just theft, create this hoarder mentality, I think.
I love how 1 minute they're talking about like monogamy and polyamory and like woke shit, and the next it's just radical Marxism.
And then that somehow also translating to relationships and interpersonal human connections.
Before agricultural practices, early humans had little need to worry about individual resources because private property was limited to what a person could carry. Post-agriculture, individual humans were suddenly rewarded if they claimed ownership over a swath of land. A man could suddenly pass down real estate if he could identify his heirs and could now benefit from being monogamous or polygamous.
That just means no more group sex.
Women who used to be viewed as equal to men were now seen as resources to be controlled and were/are punished if they seek out polydynamics that they enjoyed before.
Because then whose kid is who?
I can't be the only one, but sometimes I feel like woke people live in an alternate reality. I mean, the comments on this video just further confirm that feeling. Sounds like greed may be the very root of patriarchy and capitalism. Everyone was chilling and sharing, and then some man said, "Mine!" Yeah, that's exactly how history played out. I wish we could return to indigenous ways of living, or at least take advice from it. Tell me you know nothing about indigenous ways of living without telling me you know nothing about indigenous ways of living. Another person says, I came to the realization that agriculture was the beginning of the end. And how many bong hits did you take before you came to that realization? I mean, there's just so much to unpack here, but first let's start with the Marxist shit, I guess. The idea that private property is theft is something so stupid, only a highly educated academic person could believe it. It's a classic Marxist trope, but it's just not true. Me owning and operating a business does not mean I'm stealing from anyone. I can employ people. I can provide people with goods and services they want. I can help my community and create jobs. And there's no stealing involved at any point. I don't have to take anything away from people. In fact, the definition of what I'm doing is mutually beneficial exchanges, because nobody's forced at gunpoint to come to my store and buy my stuff. Nobody's forced to work for me. It's all voluntary. It's all win-win agreements and arrangements. But somehow us owning businesses and being entrepreneurial is stealing. The math is not mathing, babe. But math is not the strong suit of Marxists, so I can't say I'm surprised. I mean, I can't believe we're talking about the agricultural revolution like it's a bad thing. Like, you know, that's a huge part of the reason that human societies became more prosperous and people stopped starving so much and populations were able to grow, and it led later to the Industrial Revolution that created all this amazing reductions in maternal mortality and increased lifespan and longevity. It just, and you're saying that's bad because in your made-up version of history, it caused monogamy. Huh? And this really is just fake history. I mean, this is history 10 hits of the crack pipe too deep. The idea that women were fully equal and all societies were feminist and dominated by gender equity, and then agriculture came along and the patriarchy was created, isn't true. Open a book. I mean, gender roles and the various levels of gender equality have varied in different civilizations, but the idea that women were equal pre-agriculture era in most or even any significant number of societies is not true. In fact, it would be much better to have been born a woman in one of these post-agricultural revolution societies than in most of those societies that came before. And I mean, I don't even want to get into this whole thing about polygamy versus monogamy, but monogamy is not ridiculous. If you want to go do something else, knock yourself out. I really don't care. But there's a reason monogamy exists. It's not ludicrous. It's natural for a lot of people. I mean, and there's a lot of science behind things like pair bonding. But if you want to have your weird queer podcast where you talk about polygamy or whatever, like maybe just don't do it with fake crackhead history, and weird anti-reality Marxism. We can have that conversation, but I feel like that's just not too much to ask. But who knows? Maybe I'm the crazy one. Today, this trans activist TikToker is lecturing people for not being good allies because they use the slogan, "Love is love." Let's take a listen. And thanks to a listener who pointed this TikTok out to me because I'm actually blocked by this person, so I don't think I would have otherwise seen it.
If you have used the term "love is love" this Pride Month or ever, please watch this video. Now, while this phrase is a beautiful and divinely true sentiment, I want you to reconsider its use as a catch-all phrase for LGBTQIA+ rights. Love is love comes from campaigns for marriage equality. It addresses the fact that all people deserve to love who they love. So it's widely used to express acceptance of all sexualities. But I don't feel this adequately expresses acceptance for trans and non-binary people. Because gender identity is not about who we love. It's about loving who we are.
Y'all, there's so much more to this video, but I just have to say one thing quick. For these trans activist types, the concept that not everything is about them is so alien. Like, they cannot imagine that people would not make every single thing about them and their identities and their perspective and what's important to them. Babe, it's not about you. Not everything is about you. The world does not revolve around non-binary people. People are allowed to have slogans or talking points that don't always specifically name and include you and your pet project and identity, especially when that pet project includes nonsensical and incoherent things like non-binary. Now, I have my own issues with the term "love is love." I think it's a little too broad, but I guess love between consensual adults is love. Doesn't have the same quite ring to it, but I think I would like to clarify that before I would ever use that slogan. But again, I'm just struck by the narcissism behind these kinds of TikToks, making these petty complaints about word choice.
Under my videos speaking towards my experience as a trans person, I've noticed a lot of folks in my comments replying "love is love," or even referring to Pride Month as gay pride. This harkens back to a vast history of trans people being pushed to the side in the Pride movement.
Oh my God. How oppressed can you really be? How many real problems must you have in your life if you're actually taking the time out of your day to nitpick the phraseology that people use to support you in your comment section? You gotta be kidding me. You gotta give me a break. Now, the next part of this video is where we get into my favorite genre of TikTok content, crackhead history.
While trans and gender nonconforming women and people of color like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, Miss Major, and many more were pivotal in organizing for LGBTQ+ rights during the Stonewall Uprising, a lot of cisgender people in our community, specifically gay men, were against trans inclusion in the movement because they felt that it would hold them back.
And so here, this trans activist has just repeated the fake history, the woke mythology that you hear a lot from people in the TQ+ activist crowd. The Stonewall Uprising and brought about the gay rights movement, or at least kicked it into full steam, was not, in fact, led by trans women of color. The crowd that kicked off this riot and uprising was, almost although not exclusively, white gay men. The claims made here about these individuals like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera are not true. Marsha P. wasn't at the Stonewall riot until 2 a.m., late in the night when everything important had already kicked off. It's constantly said that Marsha threw the first brick at Stonewall, but that is mythology, not history. Marsha was also a drag queen, not a transgender person, and it's not clear that Marsha ever identified as transgender. Sylvia Rivera was also not there when the Stonewall riot kicked off, and actually did not identify as transgender until much later in life. At the time, Sylvia was simply a gay man. Miss Major does appear to have been there when the riot actually kicked off, so at least a little bit of accuracy to that one, but wasn't a major leader in the uprising. All of this is woke mythology, or as I prefer to call it, crackhead history. But that's not surprising. Coming from the alphabet people, from the Wi-Fi password community, they've been doing this and spreading this nonsense for years.
A lot of cisgender people in our community, specifically gay men, were against trans inclusion in the movement because they felt that it would hold them back. And this still happens today within a huge community of folks who identify as LGB without the T. And in 2007, L and G rights leaders were willing to sacrifice protections for trans people in the 2007 Employment Non-Discrimination Anti-Discrimination Act for the sake of gaining their own. This just shows how society was and is more ready to accept homosexuality before trans existence.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, that perspective that gay rights would be dragged down by the trans movement has kind of aged well. We've seen that play out in recent years, particularly as the trans movement has gone into radical territory, like advocating for biological males in women's sports or for kids doing irreversible transitions and treatments. And this complaint about the gay rights activists in 2007 who were willing to sacrifice protections for trans people, they were just being pragmatic. They thought they could get protections for sexual orientation passed into anti-discrimination law, but they thought if they included gender identity as well, they couldn't get it passed. That's just how politics works. It's piecemeal activism, taking what you can get. It's not representative of some horrific thing against the trans community. It's just being pragmatic. Something is better than nothing. And yes, my dear, homosexuality is more easily acceptable than transgenderism to many people, particularly as transgenderism has gone beyond the traditional cases of people with rare instances of gender dysphoria who just want to live as the opposite sex and gone into this territory of imaginary fake things like non-binary identity. Homosexuality is much more reasonable and coherent at the conceptual level and doesn't require anybody else to give up something, to redefine how they view sex and gender or give up their single-sex spaces or sports or other things. So of course it's more readily acceptable to more people. That's just common sense.
This exclusion, both within and without the LGBTQIA+ community, is a big reason why us trans folks are still fighting for our rights today. With now 597 anti-trans bills circling the United States, 42 have passed.
I mean, look, that's a scary sounding statistic, and if they were actually horrific bills targeting trans people, I'd be upset about that. But they get that fake number by counting legislation that restricts women's sports to people born biologically female as an anti-trans rights bill, by counting legislation that requires you to be of a certain age before doing irreversible changes to your body, by counting that as an anti-trans bill. So these statistics are meaningless because they include things that are just common sense, not inherently bigoted or hateful.
So I challenge you to consider the implications of the verbiage you are using. Do not let us trans folks fade into the background of your support and allyship. Don't just say love is love. Say love is love and protect trans lives. Then take action accordingly.
I challenge you to get thicker skin and stop nitpicking word choice and maybe find something real and serious to talk about. But that's just too much to ask, I guess.
And if you do not know how, you can sign up for my trans allyship video course at the link in my bio. Society consistently uplifts those who have the closest proximity to privilege. A pride parade is not just a big party, it is a march. We need to focus our Pride Month on lifting up those who need our support the most. As Marsha said, no pride for some of us without liberation for all of us. So let's get to it. I love you.
I gotta be honest, I don't love you. I'm not a big fan of your content, to be honest. The love is not mutual here, babe. I love how when you get to the end of one of these woke rants, there's always some sort of grift attached. And now, after this long diatribe explaining how you're problematic for something incredibly minor and irrelevant, you, if you still don't fully follow, can pay me money to educate you. Guys, didn't you know we can discover the heart of allyship for just $49.99? We can embark upon a self-reflective approach to trans and non-binary support with a 5-part video workshop series guaranteed to help you build a deeper connection with your allyship to the trans and non-binary community. Oh boy. Guys, maybe I should low-key sign up for this and then live stream it. Let me know what you think. If you'd be interested in watching me take this course and educate myself better, let me know in the comments. I can't really handle any more of this TikTok stuff in one day without incurring permanent brain damage, so do hit that like button to reward my suffering. Today, this TikToker is spreading fear porn about how Republicans are supposedly going to roll back interracial marriage. Let's take a listen and see. Maybe she's got some hardcore evidence and receipts behind her claim.
I hate being right. I hate being right. But for those of you who've been following me for a while, I called this a couple of years ago. Indiana Senator Mike Bruen said interracial marriage ruling should be left to the states, and that Loving versus Virginia in 1967 was a mistake and should not have been ruled on by the Supreme Court. They're coming after all of us. This would nullify my parents' marriage, were my father still alive. This would nullify my marriage. I am incandescent, and I am not sorry. I do not apologize for the rage. I do not apologize for any of it right now. Keep this in mind when you go to vote. Get out there and get rid of these people. They are dangerous.
You know what I think is dangerous? Spreading totally baseless fears and concerns and hysteria to huge audiences online and not doing basic research or fact-checking first. The comment section on this video is really disturbing, guys. I'll just read a few for you. Politicians need to know what real fear feels like. I think we should bring back the guillotine for them quickly. Oh? This country is f***ing disgusting. White women will continue to vote against their own best interests. Conservatives still want owning humans as property to be a state's decision. I may be wrong, but is this not a similar mindset to the Nazi mindset? Only wanting a pure race, no mixing, no gays, etc. Love just throwing gays in there. And white women who think we are safe, our right to vote, among others, is on their chopping block too. Y'all, apparently the 19th Amendment is coming next. Oh my God. It's giving delusional. It's giving out of touch with reality. Even if we took at face value this TikToker's evidence that they provide, which we actually can't do, as I'll explain, but even if we took at face value their evidence, which is a 2022 article reporting that one Republican senator from Indiana, Mike Braun, she mispronounced his name, but I can't really throw shade about mispronunciation now, can I? Even if we took at face value this notion that one Republican senator said interracial marriage should be overturned, how does that mean that it's some imminent prospect that one member of a party out of so many in the Senate and Congress and governors and presidential candidates said something, therefore it's what they all support and what is all going to happen? No, literally no one else would agree with that. And also, it's a Supreme Court decision. So what a senator thinks about it has no impact. The Supreme Court would have to overturn Loving v. Virginia, which they're not going to do. The math here is just not mathing. Republicans do support interracial marriage. This is just not a thing. And even if one senator from one state somehow didn't, that wouldn't mean that that was the whole party or that was what they were going to do. That's just not how that works. You can find one crazy member of the Democratic Party saying something all the time. Doesn't mean it's the position of the whole party or what they would all immediately do if they got power. But what's crazier is that Mike Braun clarified that that wasn't even what he meant. As reported by that right-wing website, CNN, Braun later clarified his comments, saying in a statement that he misunderstood the question. He said, earlier during a virtual press conference, I misunderstood a line of questioning that ended up being about interracial marriage. Let me be clear on that issue. There is no question the Constitution prohibits discrimination of any kind based on race. That is not something that is even up for debate, and I condemn racism in any form, at all levels, and by any states, entities, or individuals. In a brief interview on Wednesday, Braun told CNN that he does not believe interracial marriage should be determined by the states. No, Braun said. He said he wasn't paying close enough attention to the earlier line of questioning and basically was trying to talk about Roe v. Wade. So the core crux of her argument that this one Republican senator wants to overturn interracial marriage isn't even true. So there's literally zero truth to this insane fear porn narrative that she spread to hundreds of thousands of people on TikTok that has some of them in the comments fully believing it to the point of bloodlust. This is fine. Nothing to see here. This is fine. I don't know, man, but I personally think it's bad to scare people baselessly and to get them all riled up and concerned and living in a state of fear when that is not justified by the facts. I actually think that's deeply, deeply harmful, reckless, and irresponsible. It also discredits your actual critiques. I mean, a hefty chunk of the Republican Party still does oppose gay marriage. So if you wanted to debate that and go after them on that, we can have that conversation. But no one seriously disagrees with interracial marriage. There is no movement to get rid of it. There's no signs that's going to happen. That's not something any Republicans in any actual positions of power support. So this is just delusional fear porn scaring the masses needlessly. And this kind of scary rhetoric, if people actually believe it, I mean, it can prompt violence. You saw the comments I read. Now, I always believe that the The responsibility for violence ultimately lies in the individual who makes that choice. So if some crazy person saw this TikTok and decided to go after Mike Braun, for example, that would be on them. It wouldn't necessarily be on this TikToker. I do firmly believe that. But still, as people with platforms, we do have a responsibility to not spread incorrect information and rile people up emotionally, rile up their emotions based on things that aren't true, in part because you never know who's listening. And there could be someone crazy who will do something drastic in response to something that you said. And that's still ultimately their choice and their responsibility. But that is why you shouldn't be reckless with your platform, like this woman so clearly was, in my view. Hey, this mom explains that her daughter now identifies as an animal. Yes, seriously. Let's take a look.
Sat down and she opened up to me about what was going on. She said that, Mom, I wanted to let you know that I am a Therian. And of course, I was just like,
oh,
okay, what the is that? Like, what is a Therian? Because you can tell me a lot of things and I'm gonna be, okay, all right. But that literally had me scratching my head because I've never heard that before. So backtrack before this conversation, she was always asking to go to Hobby Lobby and Michael so that she could pick up masks. And I noticed that she was, drawing masks and wearing animal masks and I thought that was really great. I'm like, okay, she's, very artistic and she's getting into, some new hobbies and being real crafty, and I love that. However, I did not know that she was slowly becoming a part of this group or this community of people where they actually identify as animals. She started talking to me about how in her past life she was an animal and that it was now her mission in this life to reconnect and remember what type of animal or Therian spirit she was. I can't make this up because, you would expect that you have to come out as trans, gay, whatever, but the last thing you would expect a child to come out as is as an animal, okay? It got to the point where she wanted to wear the mask out in public, like at the grocery store, at the mall. We went to Disney. She snuck her mask in the bag and tried to wear them to Disney. So I started researching what this was about. And I'm the type of parent, I'm definitely not going to stifle your ability to express yourself and identify yourself as you see fit. I want you to be happy, even if that means you are howling at the moon. If that makes you happy, I'm okay with that. But what I am concerned about is a young mind being susceptible to cult and cult-like groups.
So this is where we are. In the year of our Lord, 2024, kids are identifying as animals and wanting to wear animal masks and believing that in her past life, she was an animal. Babe, the Delulu is off the charts. It is great to be open and accepting to your child. But like anything, there has to be a limit. And when you're so open-minded, your brain can fall out. It is not a parent's job to just affirm anything a kid says. And this mom does express some skepticism in this full video about but is she being misled by online groups or what's going on here? I'm not quite sure. But unfortunately then does seem to go along with it because she has other videos showing her shopping for animal masks with her and just going along with this. And I think that's a mistake. Okay? You are not an animal. You cannot identify as an animal. Well, I guess you can, but you're still not. And it is important to help children understand the difference between delusion and reality, fact and fantasy. The correct response to your child telling you they identify as an animal is to take them to therapy, take away TikTok, take away the cell phone and the social media for a while, and don't bully them, don't shame them. It's okay if they want to dress up as an animal and play pretend sometimes, but don't go along and start affirming that they actually are an animal, that they have a spirit animal, that they were an animal in a past life, any of that nonsense, because it's not real. It's not valid. It's not legitimate. Of course, you should never reject your child or disown them or abuse them just because they identify a certain way or anything like that. But that doesn't mean you have to go complete to the opposite extreme and just accept and embrace anything they tell you. And that's, I think, the shortcoming with the liberal perspective on these issues is well, I just want my child to be happy, so anything goes. There does have to be a limit to that at some point. If your 10-year-old starts identifying as a freaking cat, the answer is not to give them catnip. okay? The truth is that stuff like this is a warning to parents. You've got to be aware of what your kids are looking at online because there is a lot of this nonsense gobbledygook and there is a lot of this stuff being spread as a fad, and there's a sense of community, and there's Reddit threads, and there's TikTok communities, and there's all sorts of things they can get sucked into where they're told all of this nonsense, and they're told that anyone who doesn't affirm them is traumatizing them or bullying them or abusing them or whatever. And it can be really toxic and dangerous. And it can lead impressionable young people with mushy brains down ridiculous paths where they start actually believing they're an animal on the inside or something else absurd. This TikToker actually had a message for parents out there that I thought was a good one.
There's a lot of things out there online for these babies to get into. And if you are not actively monitoring it, your baby could be in a whole cult and you wouldn't even know it. I noticed the mask, and I noticed the increased interest in wearing, different animal masks, but it wasn't until I snooped around online. It wasn't until I snooped around online that I noticed that this was a lot bigger than, oh, I just want to pretend to be an animal. No, this is some pretty deep stuff, you guys. So I don't know if there are any other moms that have experienced this, but if you have, drop your comment below, or if you haven't heard of it, I mean, just be aware that this is what Therians means, that's what it is, and that is really growing in this tween Gen Z, Gen Alpha generation.
I'm sorry, but I shouldn't be laughing because in another sense, this isn't funny. Like, it's very serious. These are mental health issues that young people are experiencing. But another thing, they literally call themselves Therian. They identify as a fucking animal. That is hilarious. But this mom does need to take her own advice. She does need to be more skeptical of what her kids are up to online. And you do not need to just blanket affirm anything your child says about their identity or their sense of self. I think that's one of the most toxic ideas in modern new wave thinking and parenting that I've seen. You should not, obviously, I think if you go too far to the other extreme, if you try to crack down on this and force your child to stop this nonsense, it may have the opposite effect because sometimes kids that dig their heels in, but you also don't need to affirm it and embrace it and just double down on it either. You can tell your child, no, you are not an animal. No, I'm not going to refer to you with pup self pronouns. You are a young lady. Come on, get a grip. But you should not obviously be doing anything horrible to your child just because they're being silly about this kind of thing. And you can't go too far and try to force it out of them, or many teenagers or preteens will just double down on it as a form of rebellion. But we can't go down this path of just affirming anybody's sense of self all the time. It leads to a ridiculous place eventually. So there does have to be some limit and some degree of common sense that comes in here sometime. This kind of thing makes me frightened to become a parent one day. It really does. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering through this insane app. Today, this 19-year-old TikToker thinks she's running for president. Let's take a listen to her ideas.
I'm 19 and running for president of the United States.
So I'm gonna let you finish, but you're actually not, because that would be illegal. The Constitution requires you to be 35 years old or older to run for president. Now, she clarifies that she's running for president in 2040. We're not off to a great start, but let's hear her out.
What I'm gonna do when I'm elected. So I've had a lot of people ask about my platform, and you can read the full thing in the link in my bio, but I'll go over the 5 key points. So the first thing I want to do is I want to eliminate all corporate lobbying. I want to end insider trading. I want to make the government less corrupt. And the main driving force of this would be a law that I'd sign that would limit campaign contributions to $1,000 a person and ban corporations from funding our elections.
So our not great start has actually gotten less great. First, ban corporate lobbying. Look, I think we'd all like less corporate influence in our politics, but you actually just can't do that. The First Amendment specifically names and guarantees the right to petition your government for redress as a constitutional right that all people, even those who work for corporations, are entitled to. Corporations do have a constitutional right to request the government to shape certain policies in certain ways or to make different choices. And I mean, they're affected by the policies and rules that governments make. So, I mean, they should have a right to have their voice heard. So the idea that you can or should ban them from lobbying is not correct. Second, when she talks about ending insider trading, if what she means is congressional stock trading, I'm actually open to that. I do think it's highly suspicious how people like Nancy Pelosi get inside information, but also are buying and selling individual stocks, and then they're beating the market. Now, Congress overall doesn't beat the market, but certain individuals do. So I'd be totally open to a rule saying, you have to have general funds or a blind trust or something. You can't personally, or your spouse or your brother or something like that, can't personally trade individual stocks. I think that'd be reasonable. And maybe she's onto something with that one. But then the thing about limiting campaign contributions to $1,000 per person, they're already limited to, I think, $3,300 per person per election. So that's not a huge difference. And that $2,000 isn't what's currently shaping politicians' influence. The real thing is the super PAC spending, which you can't actually limit because of Citizens United, which is a Supreme Court case, a Supreme Court decision that the president can't change. So there's just a lot that's off here, to be honest. But there's more.
The second thing I want to do is make the economy fairer for all. I want to break up big monopolies that are causing our prices to be sky high, which will drive down inflation and bring down your grocery bill.
Oh boy. Well, if only somebody had thought of the idea to make the economy fairer. Here too, our friend is quickly going off track and losing the plot, because this idea that corporate monopolies are the reason prices have gone up, babe, no. Market concentration did not change from 2020 to 2021. There wasn't suddenly more monopolies, and that's why prices went up. That's not how that works. Market concentration in the US hasn't meaningfully changed for decades, yet prices have rapidly risen over the last few years. And that's because it's not about monopolies or corporate greed. It's about overstimulus spending. It's about printing money by the central bank. It's about global supply chains and so many other things. But you've got a fake scapegoat behind this high prices problem. And so if that's what your solution is aimed at, it's not actually going to do anything or help anybody.
And the third thing I want to do is secure human rights for all, both constitutionally mandated rights, and make food a human right, water a human right, and end discrimination once and for all.
Oh boy. So just everything is going to be free, and we're all going to have human rights to everything we need. That doesn't sound naive or utopian at all. But you don't actually have a human right to food or water or shelter, because those are things that other people have to work to provide. No, as an adult, you have human rights, but you have negative human rights. You have the right to not be harmed physically by someone else. You have the right to not be censored by your government. You have the right to not have your property stolen, but you are not entitled to anything. You don't have a right to someone else's labor, to someone else's resources, to resources that don't just magically appear and can never be made free. As an adult, it is your job to provide for yourself and meet your own needs, not force other people to meet them for you in the name of some fictional right. And hilariously, we're going to have free everything, and everything's going to be human right, but we're also going to have lower taxes. Let's listen.
The fourth thing I want to do is lower taxes for the people, end corporate tax loopholes for the rich, secure the minimum wage by tying it to inflation.
I've been over this data on this show many times, but the rich already pay the vast majority of federal taxes. You can't squeeze much more out of them. Corporate taxes, if you increase those just affect workers. They're borne out through lower wages and fewer jobs. So there is no meaningful way to have huge new federal entitlements and programs without any new taxes for the working class or the middle class or anything like that. This is the Lulu land, not actual policy.
And the last thing I want to do is I want to shift our foreign policy from a world of war to a world of peace, essentially aggressively negotiating with places instead of going to war with them, ending the arming of oppressive regimes, and spending our budget on the people instead of the rich and war. Comment below if you have any questions.
I have many questions, but I don't think you have answers, unfortunately. Now, maybe you will by 2040, but so far, I've got to be honest, not super impressed. There is just this naive, youthful nature I observe with a lot of these TikTokers where they think that this stuff is actually cut and simple. It's actually not complicated or hard. And they know the solutions, right? All the generations that came before them just couldn't see how obvious it is to just fix things. We just need a foreign policy focused on peace instead of war. Nobody's ever thought of that before. What did you think of this young woman's political campaign? Do let me know in the comments below.